Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. This is super exciting that we have our very first new vodcast, as we're going to call it. And this is entitled Ask Patients, because that is what we are going to do. I'm Jen Horonjeff, the founder and CEO of Savvy Cooperative, where here it is our mission to make sure that companies and innovators can hear directly from diverse patients so they actually know what they care about. And so today I have the utmost privilege of introducing three of those amazing patients who are out there trying to elevate the patient voice for them as individuals and for their communities. And we're going to just dive in and kind of really talk about what's happening right now for them in light of all that's happening with COVID-19. What are they hearing about from their communities? That's what we want to help make sure that we're kind of able to understand the voices and the experiences of people who are not here talking with us today. So we want this to be a nice, rich, dynamic conversation. So please, you will notice that there is a chat box for those of us tuning in live. Please submit your questions. We'll be getting to those towards the end. But in the meantime, I want to introduce my three fantastic guests who are joining us here today. And they all represent different perspectives. So Molly Schreiber, who is an advocate with both type 1 diabetes and with rheumatoid arthritis. Adam Hayden, who also is representing brain tumors, specifically a glioblastoma. And Tina Aswani Omprakash, who is representing sort of the IBD, the Inflammatory Bowel Disease community with Crohn's disease and gastroparesis. And they are not only just people who have these kinds of health conditions that they're experiencing, they're all amazing advocates. They have experience as speakers, philosophers, writers. They work in the healthcare space as consultants advising in this area. So really honored to have you guys here with us today. So thank you. Before we kind of dive in, I want to kind of give each of you an opportunity to share a little bit about yourself so that our listeners understand sort of the lens that you're coming in. I mean, I think it's very interesting to me personally as a patient who's been doing this for a long time. My experiences are very different than others because since I was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis when I was an infant, I actually don't know anything different than being a quote unquote patient. But I think that that really also starts to shape our lives and our lenses. And that's what I find interesting right now in this climate for people who are experiencing this sort of health crisis. It could be the very first time that they're experiencing that. So let's kind of go through and just kind of understand, the patient experience that you're coming into this conversation with. So Molly, I'm going to throw it over to you first.
Okay, I am Molly Schreiber. I am in Baltimore, Maryland. Been here a long time. I did grow up in Northern Virginia. I have had type 1 diabetes since I was 9. I'll just give my age. I turned 40 last November. And my father had it as well. So I grew up, it was all I knew. It wasn't a big moment for me getting it because that's what we did. I had already helped my dad take injections. That was my life. Fast forward to 2012 in January, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And I think what's helpful for my story is to know that that was a hard diagnosis because of the disease, but because the treatments are so varied. With diabetes, it's insulin. That's what works. That's what every single one of us takes. And I was given this disease that has no predictable treatment on what will work for you, what won't work for you, what might work for Jen, doesn't work for me. And that was a lot to wrap my head around. But aside from that, I have a family and I work full time for a pediatric hospital. And I've really tried in my social media advocacy, whatever you want to call it, to share the positives and negatives to kind of give a clear picture of living with a chronic illness.
Yeah, thanks so much, Molly. And we're so grateful to have you and sharing all of those experiences. Adam, I'm going to throw it over to you. Give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks so much, Jen. And thanks to you and the whole Savvy Co-op team for organizing this. It's exciting. So I kind of come at illness through two perspectives. One is really rather sudden. So I was 34 years old. I will soon be 38 later this month. I was 34. I had no major medical history. In fact, I had never even broken a bone before. And then I had these weird episodes begin. And through kind of the rabbit hole of diagnostics, we finally got to an MRI that revealed a large primary brain tumor. So surgery, chemo, radiation, turns out that that is the aggressive and so far incurable brain cancer glioblastoma. So kind of sudden out of nowhere, like, wow, no major medical history, and yet this really devastating diagnosis. But then the other piece of this is that I had all of these experiences in my life that sort of led up to handling, I think, this diagnosis in the way that I have. So a couple of those. I did my undergrad in medical humanities and philosophy. I did a grad degree in philosophy. My dad's a pastor, so there was some faith stuff floating around. And actually, the job I was working when I was diagnosed was working with organizational change management to roll out a big Medicaid management information system. So I was sort of in the healthcare space as a consultant, not as a patient. So I think that kind of, mix of like sudden, wow, what now? But also drawing on my life experience has kind of informed my reaction to illness.
Yeah, what a diverse background. I remember when you told me that. It's interesting how our lives push us in different directions and the different sort of preparedness. And I think that's one of the things that we want to make sure that we can talk about today is that all of us have been sort of experiencing health and our health conditions in a particular way that may make us ripe for preparing for COVID-19 and how we're interacting and reacting to this new world. But not everybody's at that point. So I think it's an important lens for our listeners to really be thinking about is that not everybody is in the same space and access to the same information or resources. So it's nice to set the stage. So Tina, please kind of help round us out so that we understand what those different perspectives are.
Sure thing, Jen. First of all, thank you so much for hosting this today, for giving awareness to what it's like to live in the era of COVID-19 with chronic illnesses. I'm Tina of Own Your Crohn's. That's my social media advocacy platform. I do have Crohn's disease. I've had it for the last 14 years. I have a permanent ileostomy, which is a bag that's connected to my abdomen that allows me to defecate. I also have gastroparesis for the last few years, even though I was just diagnosed last year. I know I've had this diagnosis for at least a few years now. And as many of us know, it can take some time to get a good, solid diagnosis sometimes. I also have a number of other extraintestinal ailments. As many of you might know, that inflammatory bowel disease, which consists of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, can come with joint, skin, eye manifestations. And with the number of surgeries that I've had over the years, I've had at least 20. I've developed things like pelvic floor dysfunction and a number of other issues that have come out of the Crohn's disease. So I primarily advocate for digestive diseases, and I am considered immunocompromised. So that is something that plays into the whole COVID-19 pandemic and my anxieties around that. At home, it's my husband and me. I live in Manhattan in New York City, the epicenter of the virus as well. And that pretty much rounds out who I am.
Well, I doubt that rounds out who you are, but thank you for that introduction again. It's great to kind of just understand some of the different perspectives that you guys bring into this. And so what I think we should kind of dive into first is just kind of, Tina, what you were touching upon, how all of these different things are shaping our experiences, especially the fact that we're all living in different areas. So the disease and the virus may be impacting different places in different ways. But of course, we have the extra fun layer of having our health conditions also add to that sort of perspective. So Tina, I'm going to throw it back over to you. What has this been like, especially living in New York City and trying to just maintain your health and wellness around an ever-changing landscape of concern about that sort of high-risk situation that we're all facing?
Absolutely. And I think you know this too, Jen, being in the New York City area. It's high stress right now. It's high pressure. You feel it even in your own home, whether you have the news on or not. And for me, I'm on biological drugs as well as an immunosuppressant. So I am considered immunocompromised as a result of that. And from what I understand and from what my doctors tell me, that makes me more susceptible to something like COVID-19. So about 4.5 weeks ago, when I reached out to my gastroenterologist, he was like, Tina, it's time to hunker down. Don't step out until and unless you need to. Don't go to the grocery stores or anywhere unless you need to. So what I'm doing really is going for walks at night, just to try to get some exercise, because I do have gastroparesis and things don't move because my stomach is paralyzed. So I am trying to get that exercise in, also because I have arthritis. I am also dealing with asthma right now because allergy season is fully robust right now, as many of us know. So I do have asthma from severe allergies. So I'm just trying to manage all these different things at this time. And I think what's been really difficult is not being able to go to my appointments. I am doing telehealth for sure for the last 4 weeks. But one of the things that I've been dealing with the last 5 to 6 weeks is a herniated disc in my neck. For that, I need manual physical therapy. And it's very, very hard for me right now to go in. And I'm only going in if I absolutely need to avoid the ER.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on some things that even I didn't think about. The fact that you might be going on these walks in the evening, and living in New York City, we don't have backyards. One can be going out and pacing around and all of these kind of things that when I talk to my parents, they're saying that's what they're doing. And I'm like, what's a yard? So I think that that just adds that different lens and extra layer of stress, as you say. I mean, everyone here is stressed, but when you are dealing with these health conditions, it just adds to that. So Molly, what's going on in Baltimore? What's happening over there, and how is that relating to the experiences that you have? And I know that you're working, in the healthcare space too. So maybe you can help us understand what you're seeing.
Sure. I thought what Tina said about feeling the stress in your home, even if you don't have the news on, really spoke to me, because even if you're not watching it or seeing it live, it's in the air. You just feel it. So I thought that was a really great way of stating it. Yeah,
well, too soon? Too soon?
The stress. So similar to Tina, my rheumatologist reached out to me in the beginning of March and just said, hey, I already telework a couple times a week. And she said, I'm going to need you to stay home. And when I first set it to work, they're kind of like, because it hadn't really hit here. I mean, it had, but not major restrictions yet. So I actually applied for a disability accommodation, which fast forward to now, everyone is being forced into telework, even if they hadn't. So I was a little bit ahead. I'm good at telework only because even with knee surgeries, I'm very hard-headed about giving RA my paid time off. So I would work with everything, the ice machine on my knee to recover, and my phone and my computer going. So I'm very used to it. So that's been an easy transition for me. But I've been talking to patient families who are not used to this. They're not used to technology. I joke that one family told me they would love to do the telegram with me. And I was like, so as things have progressed here in Baltimore, we are now supposed to stay home. You're allowed to go to work. That's pretty much it. Luckily, my husband does the grocery shopping. I've been getting very, and I'm going to use the word savvy here, about dialing in and getting choice pickup spots. Like at the grocery store, I've kind of learned when to go late at night when they've stocked but not open. I've really been doing a lot of that. And even though I laugh, it's kind of stressful to have to not be able to pop out and grab another Gatorade that I might need. You have to really plan ahead, which is something I think we're used to as patients, but not on this level. If I ran out of Gatorade, well, I can only have Gatorade Zero because I can't have sugar because I have type 1, and I can't just go get that, on my own. And I think that's what I've been struggling the most with is as someone that likes to be independent, I'm very dependent on everyone else.
Yeah. And I think, just talking about the differences, that it's a change. Many of us patients who have lived sort of an immunocompromised or high risk life have probably had some level on like a spectrum of, you know, being cognizant of making sure you're reducing your risk. And I was recounting this as a, you know, immunocompromised patient. I have not erred on the side of, you know, over Purelling everything. I liked a little bit of healthy exposure just to try to make me as hearty as possible. And now living this completely different lifestyle where we are wiping everything down, even though we don't leave the house, but, you know, doesn't hurt to just wipe down that doorknob to the outside one more time. And it's the, like you say, the stress, the impact that that has on one's well-being and anxiety is a lot, and it's very high. And Savvy ran our report from the survey that we did just 2 weeks ago now. And we found that 74% of people who responded had increased anxiety or stress. And that's a lot. And for people who have not suffered from anxiety or depression or, you know, increased stress levels and on the regular daily basis, think about what that's doing. So speaking of, Adam, tell us about what has kind of been going on for you.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting to think about this with the relationships that we establish, and I think especially, and I would hope my friends on the call might nod their heads to this, but when you begin to do kind of patient advocacy work, you know, your network extends to, of course, other patients, but then oftentimes other clinicians as well. So I think what I noticed quickly is that, you know, my parents, for example, or other friends that aren't necessarily in the space, what their news feeds looked like was very different than what my news feed looked like.
Right.
With all the relationships, you know, a lot of patients who are similar to me that have elevated risk. So I think in the very beginning, I had to do a lot of sort of pulse checking. Is this the community that's saying this? Is this a doctor friend? Is this the real state of affairs in the world?
Right.
And I think you know, that's compounded a little bit. My wife is an occupational therapist in an inpatient hospital, in a county hospital, which is you know, one of the major hospitals involved with treating COVID positive patients in Indianapolis, Indiana, which is where we live. So you know, we're a little bit of an emerging hotspot, I guess you could say. Jerome Adams, who is the acting U.S. Surgeon General, actually was a physician where my wife is working now. So we tend to just kind of listen to him because she knows him, or knew him at any rate. But, you know, he said, listen, Indianapolis and with a bunch of other cities, you know, they're this emerging kind of epicenter or hotspot. That was a tweet. And so I think that, you know, all of this communication from the kind of clinical community put me a little bit out of step with my friends who are, you know, I'm young. So other like 30-year-old, no major health issue friends. I think, you know, figuring out kind of the discord with some of the distress I was feeling, and I didn't see that reflected in my friend group. So, you know, we were really quick to like isolate, lock down, suppress, mitigate. I mean, all of that stuff. We were early advocates and adopters for those guidelines. Even more so than a lot of my friends who are continuing to sort of go out, even, you know, I mean, now the restaurants and bars are closed here. You know, pick up only, that sort of thing. But, you know, I had friends that were still going out and hanging out and doing stuff. And I was like, guys, I'm not sure this is a great idea.
Yeah.
So I think that just sort of personal kind of discord with just my social supportive network was a little bit disconcerting in the beginning. And then I think just given my own, you know, so with glioblastoma, with aggressive kind of brain cancers like this, you know, you're in regular periods of disease monitoring. The idea is that, you know, this thing's going to grow again at some point. Statistically, it would be unlikely for it not to. So you're going for MRI scans all the time. My next one's coming up in May. And in fact, my last scan showed kind of an anomalous area. So we're at a heightened sense of awareness right now, you know, worrying that this May scan could reveal this anomalous area has progressed. So it is an area of just heightened concern for Whitney and I anyway. And now, you know, we've not confirmed that MRI yet. It's late in May, so we don't need to make the decision today. But, you know, counting down the calendar days until that comes up, it's a question for us. You know, we're living with some anxiety right now, given the results of the last scan. So we hope, you know, it's weird to say you hope you get in for the MRI, but we certainly do, because we want to answer the open question right now. So that's kind of the personal take. I sort of went all over the place there, Jen.
No,
Okay.
I mean, it's great. You're making me I mean, that's the whole point. We're just, you know, trying to talk through and digest these things. You're making me think of a couple of things. first, being this idea of, and if you know me, I hate the term non-compliant, or, is the patient being compliant? But how can you be a compliant patient in this age? I had my first telehealth visit last week, much to the chagrin of people that thought I've been doing this forever. But when you have so many specialists that telehealth was not the initial way that rolled out, I had my first visit, and I have a concomitant eye disease, uveitis. That is something that you only know if it's flaring. For me, I'm asymptomatic unless I am checked. And so she said, well, when's the last time you've been checked? I said, truthfully, I'm due for a visit, but I'm not going to go face to face with somebody at a slit lamp right now. Like, that's not the right time to try to get that close with somebody. And so it made me start to think about, like, here's the things that need to be done. I would go and do them if I could, but now we have these new parameters that are preventing us from getting labs done, from going to get manual therapy like Tina talked about, from going to get scans done. How has that maybe impacted the way that you guys have been thinking about that? Tina and Adam, you touched on it a little bit. Molly, is there anything for you, either as a type 1 or an RA patient? Like, what does compliance in the outside world feel like for you?
Yeah, that's definitely a word with the type 1 community that we do not like. Compliance.
I know.
That'll get people all fired up. Well, for me, a couple of things. So, with the eye exam, so since I've had type 1 for almost 31 years, I go every year to have my eyes examined. It's, almost a question of when, not if. And luckily, I've had no problem. I've been due since March. And my doctor is actually at Johns Hopkins. I'm not going to Johns Hopkins. I am not. I mean, it's the epicenter here in Baltimore. And like you said, I'm not going this close to anyone unless you live in this house.
Questionable.
Right, exactly. And like Adam said, towards the end of March, I'm due to have my infusion. I know it's not optional for home health due to the risk of an adverse reaction. I have to have it when a doctor's present. And I don't know what I'm going to do. Like Adam said, I don't have to decide yet. But I know just when I had to delay it my past time due to insurance issues, I suffered, and physically. And so that is weighing on me, even though I don't know the date. I'm going to be so honest. Even though it's April something, I'm still thinking about it. It's heavy on my mind. In terms of type 1, this is a little off the question, but we've been advised to make sure that if we have to go to the hospital, to bring our own supplies, because there's not enough PPE to even check our blood sugars in the hospitals. That's scary. It's scary anyway to be a type 1 in the hospital, because you learn to control your own disease, and giving the reins to anyone else is terrifying, can be life-threatening. And so that, coupled with visitor restrictions, where maybe you have a family member that you really trust to handle your blood sugars, they might not be able to be by your side.
Right.
So I think that is kind of weighing on me too. When that came out and said, make sure you bring your own supplies because we can't check your blood sugars, that's scary. And that, your blood sugar affects, if you recover from an illness, it affects everything. So that to me has been weighing on me too, with, do I train someone else? And is there a point? Because would they even be able to be with me?
Yeah. And I think that, there are some of these things that I think for all of us, and it's going to be on a different spectrum, but we have things that are much more binary of, if this doesn't happen, then, it could have a fatal result, where other things may be, I don't want to say inconvenience. That makes it sound less than it probably even really is. But there is sort of a spectrum of things that are sort of, if this is not taken care of correctly, it will have really dire effects. And, not to lead into it with that, but Tina, I think, around kind of maybe some of the experiences that you're having, and certainly within the IBD space and gastroparesis, like you talk about, what is compliance? I don't even know why I'm saying that. This is my least favorite word. Why have I latched onto this right now? But what does sort of maintaining your care plan look like for you?
Is my microphone working?
Yeah.
Because it seems to be going in and out. Okay, great. So it's funny that you mentioned the word compliance, because, in a former life, I was a compliance officer on Wall Street. So I don't mind the word. But for me, on many different levels, I think it's this has become like quite a balancing act for me with all the different illnesses that I have, just not being able to go to the doctors, being concerned about how different medications are going to interact at this time, what's suppressing my immune system, what's modifying my immune system. Am I going outside and putting myself at risk? Should I wear a mask? I mean, I have definitely been wearing a mask. All these things are it's like a constant barrage of information. But what I've been trying to do is slowly sift through that, try to process all that information, see what's best for me and what's best for me to put out to the community. So for GI patients, especially for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis patients, some of the recommendations that have come out is to continue your medication unless you're on high dose prednisone. So for someone like me who's on an injectable, it's a subcutaneous injection, kind of going back to what Molly was saying, is I was very scared to take it. But given that my GI and many GIs on the internet have been saying this is the guidance that's coming out, it behooves you to take your medication because we want to prevent a flare-up. Because if you have a flare-up and you're trying to fight off COVID-19, that could be a much larger problem to deal with. So I did take my medication on time. I'm continuing it on time. I really don't want to risk a flare. But in addition to that, I just feel like what's weighing on me a lot is the fact that I coded in the hospital 3 years ago from influenza A that I picked up on the plane. This was before I started wearing masks on the plane, which I definitely do now. But that was a really, really scary experience for me. I think it happened at like 7:30 in the morning. I was in observation in the hospital because I went in with sort of this lack of balance. Like I was spinning, like vertigo. And that vertigo prodromal came before my flu episode, and I crashed. I couldn't walk or anything like that. And it was a really, really intense experience. And I think having lived through that, I'm almost like it's driving my anxiety right now towards the coronavirus, because as we know, this is not just the flu, and it's affecting everybody. In immunocompromised and elderly, definitely more so, definitely more intense. But this is really something that's driving a lot of my anxiety behind this is, what is this virus like and what would it look like if I got it? So I'm trying to do whatever I can to sort of stay out of the picture. And before I forget, I wanted to add, I'm a student at Mount Sinai Hospital. So I'm an MPH student, Master's of Public Health student there. And I get daily updates from Mount Sinai, which is not too far from where I live. And there's, even when I go for a walk, you can see tents outside. You can see they've changed the entire lobby into patient pods or lecture halls, everything. I'm doing classes virtually. And just to get some of those emails and read and have to process that, it's definitely heightening the experience. A part of me stays away from it, but a part of me wants to know. Yeah. We should know. We're citizens of this community. We should know what's going on within our respective communities. So it's one of those things where I've had to really grapple with a lot of information coming at me, trying to decide what information to take in and what information to sort of, let go at this time. So there's been a lot of different things going on, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And I think it brings up an important, thing to touch upon too, about what people want to know, what they don't want to know, what's the right amount of sort of information that people are looking to kind of receive. And, Adam, I want to throw this back over to you, talking about what kind of information the cancer community, or the brain cancer specifically community at large, is looking to be receiving. I know that we had previously chatted a little bit about the fact that in your telehealth visit, where they can it can be quite quick in the scheme of things. That do people feel like they're getting all the information and the time and the care? And just how do we get over this hurdle of people transitioning from this is how I was treated and this was how I, received my care to this sort of new age? And where is the gap in understanding how that new process works?
Yeah, I think the ability to establish a really trusting relationship with a clinician, it has always been so important and will continue to be so important. I think with complex conditions, we often are seeing multiple specialists. And I think already, so, I guess just naming the problems that exist, regardless of the kind of public health crisis we're in immediately, is that when you get different teams involved, it's oftentimes difficult to know, like, well, who's the quarterback here? To use a sports analogy, maybe but it's like, listen, I had no. So here's a personal story. I changed one of my. Well, I didn't change it. in cooperation with my doctor, we changed up one of my anti-epileptic medications. I had a really pretty severe allergic reaction, and it was like, do I call my neuro-oncologist? Do I call my general practitioner? Like, who do I reach out to figure out, how to get to the bottom of this thing? So I think already in the current sort of state of healthcare, this kind of idea of care coordination is not always working in all places as well as it should. I've been an advocate for palliative care, and one of the reasons why is because I think they do a nice job of just kind of having clear line of sight across the whole medical chart. I found that the clinicians that I've interacted with on Twitter mainly, and this is a good time to ask this question. We just had the Brain Tumor Social Media Monthly Chat, or hashtag BTSM, the first Sunday of every month at 6 Pacific and 9 Eastern. Feel free to join us. So we just had this month's chat, and we talked about COVID-19, and we addressed this a little bit. And one of the really helpful neuro-oncologists, who's an active member on that chat, Dr. Summerall, or Ashley Summerall, she said, the amount of time that I spend poring over my patients' charts before picking up the phone or the webcam or whatever for that Zoom meeting, she says, I spend a lot of time. So that I think that's really important to know that our clinicians, oftentimes we think, oh, well, they're just dialing in, they're busy, they're thinking about other things, they just open their laptop, have a quick visit, and then we're done. And I think, just because it's a different modality or a different method doesn't mean that the preparation has changed. So just as we would expect our clinicians to be prepared when we walk into the office, that same preparation is happening sort of outside of the office, whether that's on the couch or in a home office. So I think, that helped to reinforce that trust with a clinician that they are putting the amount of preparation into the same office visits just because it's delivered virtually as opposed to in person.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially as this is an incredible modality that's opening up so many opportunities for people to have access to care, even from the hopefully comfort of their own home. But again, that's a privilege that many of us actually do have. But hopefully this is something that doesn't go away, that it remains part of our toolbox for patients to receive care, even once hopefully we resolve the current crisis. But it's getting used to what is that, and that requires education from all stakeholders, patients being one of them as well. Molly, what kind of, you touch upon a few things that you're experiencing kind of in your community, but you also were very active at launching the hashtag high risk COVID-19 movement too. So you are really kind of helped to bring a voice to high risk patients everywhere. And while I know you've had limited success getting some of that stuff posted on Instagram because of algorithms that are keeping you at bay, but these are important stories to get out there. So what are you hearing? What's the sentiment of the community, and how can we make sure that we can amplify that to the people listening here?
Yeah, so starting that was initially selfish. I saw so many people still going out. I saw so many people saying, oh, only the elderly die. I saw people in my neighborhood Facebook group saying, I went to the special shopping hour and there's no way there's young people that are sick. And I was, using all my energy to respond to these people. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, it's driving me crazy. But you can't look away. It's like a car accident. You have to keep, and so I started that hashtag, and I've seen stories from babies that were just born and are premature to people that are elderly with autoimmune conditions. I've seen it all. And I have to say that there's a lot of stories. I mean, there's so many, and it's very impactful when I get out of Instagram isolation, as I call it, or quarantine, seeing just the faces. To me, that is really important because you realize they could be your neighbor. They could be you. And so hearing everyone's story was great, but the couple messages I got from people that said they didn't know what they were doing impacted someone that looked, well. I got messages on Twitter that just said, this is so crazy. I had no idea you could look like that and be so sick. And that's a message I think all of us have been trying to push out forever in our advocacy. It's, you don't know. And I think, yes, I had type 1, but when I got RA, it was like, what is it? It came out of nowhere and I couldn't walk down the stairs. You don't know. I hate to be morbid, but when your day's coming, we all get something, or your relative gets something. And I think that campaign made people realize kind of that we're everywhere, and we need you. We need you to value our lives, but to try to protect us too. And it is, parents are scared, people are scared. And that also opened my eyes to how different things are being managed in the country. I live in a Johns Hopkins bubble. I work for a hospital that's owned by Johns Hopkins. So like Tina, I get the reports and they're jarring. I mean, they definitely are not things you want to read, but hearing people's stories, people are still out having barbecues in the middle of the country. And I mean, I see kids hanging out and I want to be like, do you live together? Like, I want to go out and police the neighborhood, but people are not as, maybe, I don't want to say lucky, but their areas are not as strict, and patients are still struggling to feel protected in their communities. So I think it's definitely something that will be a continued discussion, I think, after this, because I think people realize who we are and we can get the flu. And for me, that turns into pneumonia, and I shared that. No one cared as much. I think we have an audience now. I think people finally understand that we as a country and maybe a world are fighting the same thing.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm going to jump into Q&A here in a minute. We've received some great questions, but first, Tina, I want to touch on something that, we've talked about before that I think is really important, and talking about even pre-COVID-19, but what does sort of a work and career life look like for a patient who has different abilities to be able to work in sort of the traditional stereotypical job roles. And I've had this experience myself. I kind of joke I've never had a big kid job, in that my health has dictated the fact that a 9-to-5 job prescription did not work for me and my lifestyle, especially growing up. And I had friends that I've grown up with my entire life that at a certain moment, and it was during when I had my brain tumor removed, that they realized, and I remember having a conversation with one of them, they said, I get it now. I get why you are not able to, or have chosen to not pursue a career that has this specific lifestyle, because it is so variable and you just don't know when it's going to happen. And so many patients have taken the same approach to trying to find more flexible work. But now the question is, what happens in this climate when everything just gets thrown up in the air? So as a patient that was working in sort of that consultant and contractor, lifestyle, how has this crisis now impacted your ability to work?
Sure. And I'm glad you brought up just working in general as somebody who's chronically ill. I do definitely want to backtrack and just bring awareness to, so like when I was 22, I was first diagnosed, I was already working on Wall Street, and I was for a couple of years before I needed to start having surgery. And I was out for about 7 years, I had over 20 surgeries during that time. But there was no understanding, because I looked well for the most part until I lost like 50 pounds and my hair started graying in my early 20s. I think people couldn't tell until I became really severely malnourished. And at that point, I was so socially isolated that nobody really saw me anyway. But when I was going to work, it was just like, you look well, you're young, you're healthy, so you've lost a few pounds, you look great like that, type of thing. So that was really, really tricky. Now, so fast forwarding all that time, something that I've been doing the last couple of years as a patient advocate is really taking on gigs. And that's something that I've been doing with Savvy Co-op, and really as an independent contractor here and there picking up work. And I think there was more stability, definitely before COVID-19. I think going into this sort of crisis, this threw a lot of us advocates for a loop, because a lot of us travel to do speaking engagements. And a lot of us go to conferences, we present, a lot of us do a number of different things, and depending on our health, of course. But the thing is that got really tricky is a lot of those conferences got canceled. A lot of, our activities got canceled. So that really threw things off for me for a week or two. And then I started to pick things up again, but I sort of shifted gears to focus on what the imminent need is, what the current need is for the community. And that was really putting out content in my community for COVID-19, whether we should be taking our medications or not, coming straight from the doctors or coming from patient advocacy groups, et cetera. So really helping to bridge that gap between understanding what COVID-19 is and how it affects patients in the inflammatory bowel disease community, in the gastroparesis community. I think that's really been my role these last few weeks, is trying to help bridge that gap, because there's a lot of patients who, like myself and like all of us, are anxious, apprehensive, really worried about taking their meds, and really just worried about everything at this time. So I've been really trying to focus on that. I think it's really, really important to be able to try to shift things up, change things up. And I think as people with chronic illnesses, we're used to that ebb and flow. We're used to those ups and downs. And so we can really, we can sort of handle this in a way that's different. We're used to being knocked down and picking ourselves back up. So, I took this on as more of a challenge, Jen, and saw ways where I can meet needs that were unmet at the time.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that. And it actually kind of leads into some of the questions that we're getting here. Some of the questions are being asked around, how are you educating the community? And I think all three of you have touched on that now in different ways. Tina, from getting education and writing about this so other patients know. Adam, doing the Twitter chats that you've been involved in to make sure that we can bring the different stakeholders together, both the clinicians and the patients, so we can at least sort of level the playing field. And Molly, around sort of the high-risk COVID-19 campaign, to get those stories out there and make sure the community is aware that people that look like us are also at risk and very concerned. One of the things that I want to touch on here, a question we have is, what is helpful at this time beyond having the right information? What's helpful to you all as you're managing your health and the overall ambiguity that COVID-19 brings? What's the biggest source of support? People, places, or things? So the question I'll pose to you all is, again, outside of that information, what else you can also speak from your communities in general, what else is the community looking for? So Adam, I'll throw it to you first. Thinking about that, what does that look like to you?
Had to come off mute. Every time there's a webinar that's recorded, we could have a viral video moment with my 3 kids. So,
well, I hope we get that by the end of this call.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's such a good question, and I think it's a good question for folks that are sort of living life in the illness community, but everyone, I think, is wrestling with this, because it gets to the heart of let's see.
We lost you for a moment.
Looks like you have a nightly.
Hi, did I lose you for a bit?
You did. You only cut out for a second, but you were about to give us some profound words.
Oh, Jen, I won't be invited back.
You're always invited. That's what we just set the stage for folks that are joining us now. there's a lot of technical issues happening with, Wi-Fi's and all of that. So we're just super grateful that everyone is even here with us today. I think, Adam, you might be on mute again. Oh, I think you might have I'm going to put you back on mute. All right. He might have a kid situation happening right now. So we'll come back over to Adam. So Molly, let me turn it to you. Outside of information, what is it that might be the most helpful for you?
I hate to bring up self-care because I feel like it's a buzzword now, but for me, it's been a couple things. I found that after the end of my workday, I literally would go in bed and pull the comforter over my head just to have some silence, just to have nothing. And that was huge for me. But also, I think Tina mentioned this, we usually have conferences around this time. This is like prime conference time. So, and as much as we are speaking and sharing things, we see our friends, our people that understand us, kind of like this group, and people that are tuning in, people that understand us completely. We don't have to act well or act sick. They get us. And a lot of them have been connecting via Zoom, via text message, via just, group chats. And yes, we should have been doing these things all along, but we didn't. And so I've seen my rheumatoid arthritis friends more visually than I would just in person a couple of times a year. And that has been wonderful, just to have that safe space where you don't have to explain yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, and leads to one of the other questions that we have. So Tina, I'll throw this one over to you. What does support look like at this time?
I think that's a fantastic question. So support at this time, I primarily view it as checking in on my friends, checking in on my family, and vice versa, and really saying, I love you, and that I care for you. And, just reaching out, I think, can do that. But sometimes saying those words really solidifies things for us. And I think this is a really, really heavy time for a lot of us. A lot of us are afraid for our lives, and for our families' lives and our friends. I know I have a friend who tested COVID positive, a good friend of mine, from a support group that I used to lead here in New York for IBD patients. And luckily, she doesn't have too many symptoms, but that was really scary when she first got diagnosed. And, your heart skips a beat when that happens. So being there, checking in on your friend without overwhelming them, I think is really, really important. But also something that, I've been doing for support is joining in on some of these support group channels via patient advocacy groups like the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation online. I've been helping to do chats like this, putting out content. Some of you might have seen the Inspire video that I put out with the company Inspire, just on what it means to be immunocompromised in the age of COVID-19 and what that looks like for me, just to help create that awareness for the able-bodied world. And I think that in and of itself is creating support for us too, because if we're helping other people understand what we're going through, that can only help not only with awareness, but help us all sort of traverse this and rise above this as best as we can during this time.
And I think that that's a good point. And so Molly, you sort of touched on some of this as well about things that are actually like positives coming out of this crisis. And so one of the questions that we have here is, how does COVID-19 exemplify or reveal the holes or gaps in healthcare? And in what ways can we help to create the system we want in a post-COVID-19 world? So Molly, you talked about a little bit of that from maybe even a social support standpoint, but what else within our healthcare system is COVID-19 really shining a light on?
Yeah, I think even just telemedicine in general, there's a lot of people, especially in my area, that don't have access to regular transportation or safe transportation. And for a while, telehealth was not an option. It was, you just have to get here. And that's a real struggle for a lot of people to stay with their treatment, to see their physicians. And it was sort of blown off. This is what we do. We only see patients here in the office. This is where you have to come. And I feel like this and I can see it from both working with patients for a hospital, but also doing telehealth myself as a patient. It's opening doors, and it's showing that it's not that hard and it's not impossible. And I think it's also great because insurance companies are saying, hey, we can cover this. And you're like, what? Where were you this whole time? So I think, and I hope that with this, we'll be able to get more patients healthy. We'll be able to reach more patients who necessarily can't drive every day to the hospital just to visit with someone, but, could check in this way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you're touching on. And Adam, I'm going to throw this back over to you, talking about, both what we were sharing before about what things outside of just information do patients want or need, but also thinking about that now from that post-COVID-19 world. What kind of things can we help to drive forward in the future that hopefully there can be some silver linings from how COVID-19 is really going to shake up the healthcare system in a more positive way? I think Adam should be back. Not quite yet. All right. And Adam is so great to be here with us. His internet has completely shut down, so he is joining us via mobile, and we're grateful that he's taking the time to do that. So we'll let him get his audio back up here. In the meantime, I will go on to another one of our questions here. And Adam, if you can hear us, you just chime back in. Oh, there we go.
Do you have me?
I can.
Oh my goodness.
See your handsome mug too. So welcome back.
Well, hey, thank you so much. I'm sorry.
Don't
I'm
apologize.
the fly in the ointment, as it were. Listen, so something that I've thought a lot about is the importance of touch. And here's what I mean by that, is that at each point in sort of this illness experience for me, from when we met with my general practitioner after the first outpatient MRI, up through the surgeon, up through things that have happened after, there's been this like real meaningful human touch that has happened with my clinicians. And I know not all doctors are touchers and not all patients want it. So plenty of caveats there. But I think, honestly, that touch is important. And now we know in the COVID-19 world, the touch is dangerous. So I've really been thinking a lot about what sort of tangible things can replace the touch. So if we lose the clinical touch, if, as Dr. Fauci recently said, the handshake is going to be a thing of the past. It's reminded me, my grandfather, he died about a decade ago, but he had a rubbing stone that ended up in my pocket after going through the cousins. And that tangible reminder, knowing that lived with my grandpa his whole life, and now it's something that lives with me, that's just a symbol for restoring touch when we don't have it in front of us. So I think other than just information, other than processing through, I'm a big fan of mental health. So I think mental health care is as important as physical health care. So having a good therapist on board, having a supportive social network, but I think finding tangible ways of touch, whatever that looks like, something to trace your hand over, something warm, something on your lap, a weighted blanket. I just think touch is what we need now.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because we actually know that research shows that the brain will do certain things, and we won't go into the science of it, but when we do actually experience touch, and now how can we at least trigger some of those same responses even in this socially distant world? So I think you're really hitting the nail on the head there. I think one of the interesting things that you talk about of sort of this disruption for those of us that have been used to that. And while, I know that your specific condition is not dated back to your entire lifetime, but that was something that I was realizing that I was mourning as somebody who has gone to the doctor literally my entire life. That has been my routine. And so what COVID-19 has shown me is that was the one thing that was stable in my life, was that I went to the doctor, and now I didn't. And so when I was talking about how telehealth exemplified to me, it was a signal that the world has really changed. Some took it as I was being anti-telehealth, and I'm not. I'm just saying, as a patient who is so used to going in and seeing my doctor or phlebotomist or whomever it is, that was my life. It's just very interesting to think about all of the different lenses that we have and what does that mean to each individual. And so, like you say, not everyone wants to be touched, but for many, they will be looking to have to kind of like supplement that in a different way. So thank you guys for sharing those perspectives. A couple of other questions that are coming in here. This one I find very interesting. So to the three of you, thinking about if anyone else has been asked or been invited to be part of an emergency or incident command program at your health or hospital to be sure that the patient voice or perspective was part of COVID-19 emergency preparedness. And they had offered to do this at their hospital or clinic, and the offer was not accepted. And I think this comes back to what hopefully we all are sort of sharing a common bond around, that the fact that this patient experience actually can help people on a regular basis, helping companies like what we do here at Savvy, but helping in a crisis also. And Adam, you actually wrote about that for STAT, saying, here's what we can learn from these communities. So, thinking about that, has anybody outside of perhaps, and I'm curious, maybe Adam, outside of writing that piece, did anything come of that? Did anybody approach you about how we can work with these communities? Where did that go?
Yeah, so I was really happy to write that piece, because I do think, and I think for me it was really from a place of sort of this kind of existential distress, that people were like, gosh, what does this mean? Do I need to do it? And I think for me, it was like, listen, there's some responsibility, some accountability, some purpose, some meaning that can come through sort of acknowledging our interdependence. So I think it was from that perspective that I wrote that piece. I guess I'll keep this brief, although I can't do that, as my wife will tell you. I'll keep it as brief as I can. I think I was not invited to necessarily join in any sort of protocol development, or anything like that. But what I am reminded of, and I'm encouraged by this, that so if we go over to the UK, they called for volunteers to come and bolster the NHS system, and they had 750,000 people. And I just heard on the news, I think yesterday, that's like 4 times their military, their standing military, of people that showed up to volunteer. So I think, the question is about whether we've been invited. And I do agree that I think incorporating patient experience is oftentimes overlooked when it can provide so much value. But there certainly is a groundswell of sort of quote unquote civilian support that we're seeing through COVID-19. So I am encouraged that we'll trend in that direction, on the other side as we kind of reconstruct after this crisis.
I mean, that would be certainly a great takeaway, if we can see that it's okay if we don't all have the answers, right? But if we can work together in sort of this collective hive, that we can all take our experiences and drive that forward, we'll be in a better place. So that's how I want to give each of you a last word. While this is our new series around asking patients, we wanted to leave the audience with some questions that we as patients have for you all to take back into thinking about how are you conducting, your job or interacting with your world. I have no idea what our 3 guests are going to say, but I did ask them to prepare something, a question to ask you all, to make sure that we have some place to drive you forward as you take these insights and bring them back into your daily lives. So Tina, I'm going to start with you. What question do you have to just pose to our audience before we sign off?
I think I have a couple different questions. I'm wondering how we move forward from here. So how, going back to what you were suggesting about hospitals sort of working with patients like ourselves, how do we get more involved? Because the chronic illness experience is a huge one. How can we get more involved with hospital systems, with pharma, with biotech, to help facilitate maybe some of these medication trials, maybe some of these vaccinations, to help move things along in the hospital? I understand one of my friends is a counselor, and she's sort of been transferred from doing different kinds of social work over to being a grief counselor. How about using some of us patient advocates and our experience with chronic illness to help with that process as well? I would like to see more of that. So that's kind of the question that I'm posing and putting out there.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Tina. Molly, turning it to you.
So I think I spoke about this earlier that, I've connected with people more often now than before with no reason other than COVID-19. And so I would ask people, what are you doing right now that you're going to continue after this? Is it who you're telling you love them more often? Is it checking on people? Because I think we're all seeing that what we're doing now is helpful, and not for just the other person, but for us. So, I definitely want to keep up these close connections because I could have done it 6 months ago, and I'm not exactly sure why we didn't. So I would love to know what people are going to take from this and keep their relationships strong.
That's a great point. That's a great question. Thank you for asking them that. Adam, why don't you round us out? What's your question for our listeners?
Yeah, so I think that we've been forced to confront, some kind of prickly topics such as advanced directives or advanced care planning, things like that, given COVID-19. For those in the serious illness community, this is familiar to us because we've had these conversations. So I think the question is both kind of a maybe a direction, but also a question is, what are you going to do to have conversations today with your loved ones to talk about how you can have a human and values-centered kind of end of life, whether that's tragically before your life expectancy or decades, if not more, in the future. How are you going to have that conversation with love, respect, care, and kind of the values of what matters most to you?
Wow, that's a very powerful way to end. Thank you guys for taking the time to have these interactive conversations. Thank you to our listeners who have stuck with us this entire time. It's been really wonderful. Thank you for the questions. I am so inspired because I, as one singular patient, could not possibly have had all the knowledge that you guys shared today. And I think that that's the big takeaway that I would ask our audience is, how are they going to ensure that they are getting the diverse insights they need to really build a robust picture of what's happening in light of COVID-19 and into the other sort of patient experiences that they're trying to prove as a whole. So with that, thank you so much to all of you who tuned in. I hope that you enjoyed this. Please give us your feedback. If this is a conversation that you want to see move forward, we welcome your thoughts as we continue to make sure that we help you ask patients more and more in the future. So thank you everybody for joining. And we're good. We should be done. It says it's ended. It's giving me a count.